The electric clippers buzzed menacingly in Madison's hand as she cornered the new girl against the bathroom wall. 3 other girls blocked the exits, their phones ready to record what they thought would be the humiliation of a lifetime. The quiet transfer student stood perfectly still, her hazel eyes tracking each movement with an unsettling calm that should have been their first warning. "Hold her arms," Madison commanded, her voice echoing off the tiled walls of Westfield Academy's second-floor bathroom. "This little mouse needs to learn what happens when you don't know your place." What they didn't know was that Sophia Chun had spent the last 16 years moving from military base to military base, watching her father train elite soldiers in hand-to-hand combat. What they couldn't see beneath her oversized flannel shirt and faded jeans was a body conditioned by years of following her father's rigorous training routines. What they failed to recognize in her steady breathing and measured stance was the discipline of someone who had learned to stay calm under pressure from the best warriors in the world. The clippers moved closer to her long auburn hair, and for the first time in months, Sophia felt the familiar surge of controlled aggression that her father had taught her to harness. These girls had no idea what they had just awakened. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 6 weeks earlier, Sophia Chun had walked through the gates of Westfield Academy in suburban Virginia, her military-issued duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a worn paperback novel tucked under her arm. At 16, she had already attended 11 different schools across 3 countries, following her father, Colonel James Chun, from base to base as he trained special forces units around the world. Moving had become as natural to her as breathing, but it never got easier. Westfield Academy sat on 40 pristine acres of rolling Virginia countryside, its red brick buildings and manicured lawns, a stark contrast to the utilitarian military housing she was accustomed to. The student body of 1,200 came from some of the wealthiest families in the Washington, D.C. area, their cars in the parking lot worth more than most people's homes. Sophia's father had chosen this school specifically because it offered stability, something she had never experienced before. "Remember what we talked about," Colonel Chun had said as he dropped her off that first morning, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel of their modest sedan. "Keep your head down, focus on your studies, and try to make some real friends for once. No more moving for at least 2 years." Sophia had nodded, though they both knew it was easier said than done. Making friends required vulnerability, and vulnerability was a luxury she had learned to avoid. In her experience, getting attached to people only made the inevitable goodbye more painful. The morning orientation revealed the complex social hierarchy that governed Westfield Academy. At the top sat Madison Hartwell, a 17-year-old blonde whose father owned a chain of luxury hotels across the East Coast. Madison's inner circle consisted of 3 other girls: Jessica Price, whose mother was a prominent D.C. socialite; Brittany Walsh, daughter of a tech mogul; and Chloe Davidson, whose family had old money dating back to colonial Virginia. These 4 girls controlled the social atmosphere of Westfield Academy with an iron fist wrapped in designer clothes and fake smiles. They decided who was worthy of inclusion and who deserved to be ostracized. Their approval could make a student's high school experience golden. Their disapproval could make it a living hell. Sophia had encountered similar hierarchies at every school she had attended, but Westfield's version was particularly refined and cruel. Where military base schools had straightforward bullying, Westfield Academy practiced psychological warfare disguised as social networking. The attacks were subtle, calculated, and devastatingly effective. During her first week, Sophia had tried to blend into the background, choosing seats at the back of classrooms and eating lunch alone with her book. She observed the daily dynamics with the analytical mind her father had trained her to develop. She watched Madison's group select their targets based on perceived weakness or social isolation. She noted how they used exclusion, rumors, and public humiliation to maintain their dominance. The target that caught Sophia's attention was a freshman named Dylan Martinez, a thin boy with thick glasses who had made the mistake of correcting Madison during a history class discussion. For the past week, Dylan had found his locker vandalized, his lunch tray accidentally knocked over, and his textbooks mysteriously disappearing. The teachers either didn't notice or chose to ignore the systematic harassment. On a Thursday afternoon, Sophia was walking to her car when she witnessed the escalation she had been expecting. Madison and her friends had cornered Dylan near the athletic building, where the lack of security cameras gave them freedom to operate without oversight. Maybe if you weren't such a know-it-all, people might actually like you, Madison was saying, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But since you think you're so smart, let's see how smart you really are. Jessica pulled out a bottle of honey and began pouring it over Dylan's backpack while Brittany filmed with her phone. The thick golden liquid seeped through the fabric, ruining his textbooks and homework inside. Chloe laughed as Dylan tried desperately to save his belongings, the honey making everything sticky and unusable. "Please stop," Dylan pleaded, his voice cracking with the effort not to cry. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just answering the teacher's question." "That's your problem right there," Madison replied, stepping closer. "You think you deserve to have opinions, you think you matter. But you're nobody here, Dylan. You're less than nobody." Sophia felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always preceded her decision to act. Her father had taught her that there were moments when staying silent became complicity, when the moral thing to do required risk. She had learned this lesson on military bases around the world, where her father's soldiers looked out for each other, no matter the personal cost. "Hey," Sophia called out, her voice cutting through the afternoon air. "Leave him alone." The four girls turned to look at her, their expressions shifting from surprise to amusement. Madison's lips curved into a predatory smile as she took in Sophia's appearance, the thrift store clothes, the lack of makeup, the general air of someone who didn't belong in their world. "Well, well," Madison said, her voice taking on the tone of someone who had just discovered a new toy. "Look what we have here." The mysterious transfer student finally decides to speak up. "How noble of you." Sophia walked closer, her movements deliberate and controlled. "I said leave him alone. He hasn't done anything to deserve this." "Deserve?" Jessica laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the building walls. "That's rich. Like any of us deserves anything. We take what we want because we can. That's how the world works, sweetie." "Maybe in your world," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. "But not in mine." Madison stepped forward, using her height advantage to try to intimidate Sophia. "Your world? And what world is that exactly?" "The world of discount shopping and social invisibility. The world of people who don't matter. The world where people look out for each other," Sophia said simply. "Where strength is used to protect, not to prey on those who can't defend themselves." Brittany lowered her phone, sensing that something interesting was about to happen. "Oh my God," she's like, "actually trying to lecture us. This is too good. You know what I think?" Madison said, circling Sophia like a predator sizing up its prey. "I think you're confused about how things work here. I think you need an education in the realities of Westfield Academy social structure." Chloe giggled nervously. "Maybe we should just go. I mean, this is getting kind of intense." "No," Madison said firmly, her eyes never leaving Sophia's face. "Our new friend here needs to understand something very important. When you interfere with our business, there are consequences. When you try to play the hero, you become the target." Dylan had been backing away during this exchange, clutching his honey-soaked backpack. "Sophia, just go," he whispered urgently. "They're not worth it. I'll be fine." But Sophia had already made her decision. She could see in Madison's eyes the same look. She had seen in the eyes of bullies at military base schools around the world the look of someone who had never faced real consequences for their actions, who had never encountered genuine strength disguised as apparent weakness. "Dylan's right," Sophia said, her voice remaining calm. "I should go, but so should you. This ends now." Madison's face flushed with anger. "This ends when I say it ends. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually," Sophia replied, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "I think you're the one who has no idea who you're dealing with." The four girls exchanged glances, something in Sophia's tone making them suddenly uncertain. There was a quality to her stillness that was different from the fearful paralysis they were used to seeing in their victims. This was the stillness of someone who was choosing to remain calm, not someone who was frozen by fear. Madison recovered her composure quickly. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "We'll see exactly what kind of person you really are." As the confrontation ended and the girls walked away, Dylan looked at Sophia with a mixture of gratitude and worry. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But you shouldn't have done that. Madison doesn't forget, and she doesn't forgive. She's going to make your life hell now." Sophia watched the four girls disappear around the corner of the building, their voices carrying back on the wind as they planned their next move. "Maybe," she said to Dylan, "but some things are worth the risk." What neither Dylan nor Madison's group could have known was that Sophia Shun had faced down much worse than high school bullies. She had lived on military bases where discipline was everything and weakness was not tolerated. She had watched her father train men and women who would go on to face life or death situations in some of the world's most dangerous places. More importantly, she had been trained by Colonel Chun himself in the arts of warfare, strategy, and survival. Every morning since she was 8 years old, she had risen at 0500 hours to run 5 miles with her father. Every evening, she spent 2 hours learning hand-to-hand combat, weapons handling, and tactical thinking. She could field strip an M16 rifle in under a minute, navigate by the stars, and disable an opponent twice her size without breaking a sweat. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sophia's intelligence gathering operation began at 0530 hours the next morning with a 5-mile run through the suburban Virginia neighborhood surrounding Westfield Academy. Her father had taught her that reconnaissance was 90% of successful military strategy, and she intended to apply that principle to her current situation. During her run, she mapped out the geography of Madison's world. The Hartwell family lived in a sprawling colonial mansion on Elm Ridge Drive, complete with circular driveway, professional landscaping, and a 3-car garage housing a BMW, a Mercedes, and a Range Rover. Security cameras monitored the entrance, and a discreet sign indicated the property was protected by an elite security company. More importantly, Sophia observed the household's daily routine. At 0615, a housekeeper arrived in a modest Honda Civic. At 0645, a personal trainer's Jeep pulled into the driveway. At 0715, Madison emerged from the house in workout clothes, clearly heading to the home gym her research had revealed was located in the mansion's basement. This intelligence would prove valuable, but Sophia's real breakthrough came during the third period when she volunteered to help Mrs. Patterson organized old chemistry exams in the storage room. While filing papers, she overheard Madison's voice from the adjacent student council meeting room. "The spring formal committee budget needs to reflect our new priorities," Madison was saying in her most authoritative tone. "I think we should reallocate the decorations fund toward enhanced security measures." "Security measures?" questioned another voice that Sophia recognized as Trevor Walsh, the student council treasurer. "There have been some concerning incidents lately," Madison replied smoothly. "Students acting aggressively, making threats." I think we need to ensure that our formal remains a safe space for everyone. What kind of incidents? Asked a third voice. Well, I probably shouldn't name names, but there's a new transfer student who has been intimidating other students. Just last week, she cornered several of us near the athletic building and made threatening statements. Principal Henderson is aware of the situation, but I think prevention is better than reaction. Sophia realized with grudging admiration that Madison was using the student council meeting to spread her narrative to the school's leadership students, who would then carry that version of events to their respective social circles. By the end of the day, Madison's story would be accepted as truth by the most influential students in the school. But Madison wasn't finished. I've also been thinking about the formal's theme. Instead of Enchanted Garden, as originally planned, I think we should go with New Beginnings. It sends a message about moving forward positively despite recent challenges. That's a great idea, said another council member enthusiastically. Very mature way to handle things. As the meeting concluded, Sophia remained hidden in the storage room, processing what she had learned. Madison wasn't just responding to their conflict. She was incorporating it into her broader social strategy, using it to reinforce her position as a responsible leader dealing with an external threat. During lunch, Sophia shared her intelligence. With Riley, Marcus, and Aisha, the three had become her informal advisory council, helping her understand the complex social dynamics she was navigating. That's classic Madison, Riley said with frustration. She turns everything into evidence of her own leadership qualities. Remember when the vending machines broke down last year? She somehow managed to get credit for organizing a student response, even though the maintenance staff fixed them. The formal thing is smart though, Marcus admitted reluctantly. She's creating a narrative where you're the chaos and she's the order. By the time of the dance, everyone will see her as the person who kept the school safe from the dangerous transfer. Student. Aisha looked worried. This is escalating faster than usual. Madison typically takes weeks or months to destroy someone, but she's moving against you in days. You must have really gotten under her skin. Or she sees me as a more serious threat than her usual targets. Sophia replied thoughtfully. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dylan Martinez, who approached their table hesitantly. The freshman looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. Sophia, he said quietly, I need to tell you something about what happened with Principal Henderson. You don't owe me any explanations, Dylan. Yes, I do, he insisted, sitting down despite the obvious discomfort it caused him. Madison's friends came to my house Sunday night. They told my parents that I was being bullied at school and that you had gotten involved inappropriately. They said they were concerned about my safety. Riley's eyes widened. They went to your house? Dylan nodded miserably. Jessica's mom knows. My mom from some charity committee. She came over with Jessica and Chloe, all fake concern and worry. They said that you had threatened them when they tried to help me, and that they were afraid you might escalate to violence. So when Principal Henderson interviewed you... double quote Sophia began. My parents were there, Dylan finished. They'd been told that if I supported your version of events, Madison's group might retaliate against me physically. My mom was terrified. She made me promise to stay out of it completely. Marcus shook his head in amazement. They neutralized the key witness before the investigation even began. That's not high school politics, that's professional-level manipulation. There's more, Dylan continued. They also told my parents that you come from a military family with a history of violence. They suggested that your father might have trained you in dangerous skills that you could use against other students. Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. Madison had somehow discovered her military background and was weaponizing it against her. How could they possibly know that? Jessica's mom has connections in D.C., Aisha explained. She probably made some calls, pulled some strings. Military family information isn't exactly classified. The point is, Dylan said urgently, they're building a case against you. They're not just trying to embarrass you or isolate you socially. They're trying to get you expelled. That afternoon, Sophia's suspicions were confirmed when she was called to the guidance counselor's office. Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind woman in her 40s, greeted Sophia with obvious concern. Sophia, I want you to know that this conversation is confidential, but I've been asked to check in with you about how you're adjusting to Westfield Academy. I'm adjusting fine, Mrs. Rodriguez. I'm glad to hear that. I know transitioning to a new school can be challenging, especially when you come from a military family background. Sometimes the discipline and structure of military life can create adjustment difficulties in civilian settings. Sophia recognized the careful phrasing of someone who had been coached on what to say. I haven't had any adjustment difficulties. Of course not, Mrs. Rodriguez said quickly. But I want you to know that if you ever feel overwhelmed, or if the civilian school environment feels too different from what you're used to, we have resources available. Counseling services, anger management workshops, conflict resolution training. Anger management? Sophia repeated carefully. Just options, Mrs. Rodriguez clarified hastily. Some students from military families find that the communication styles they learned at home don't always translate well to peer relationships. There's no judgment here, just support. As Sophia left the guidance office, she understood that Madison's campaign had entered a new phase. The story being constructed was that Sophia was a military kid with anger issues who couldn't adapt to civilian social norms. Any future conflicts would be interpreted through this lens, with Madison positioned as the victim of Sophia's inability to control her military-trained aggression. That evening, Colonel Chun noticed his daughter's preoccupation during dinner. "Something on your mind, soldier?" Sophia looked up from her untouched meal. "Dad, have you ever faced an opponent who was better at information warfare than you were?" Her father considered the question seriously. "Once or twice. Why?" "This girl at school, she's not just using social pressure. She's conducting a full-scale psychological operation. She's manipulating information flows, controlling narratives, neutralizing witnesses, and building dossiers on her targets. It's like fighting someone who went to the same tactical schools you did." Colonel Chun leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about her background." "Wealthy family, well-connected mother, father in business. No obvious military connections, but she thinks like someone with strategic training. Private schools, her father sighed thoughtfully. Especially elite ones, often teach the same principles we use in military strategy. Leadership development, resource management, strategic thinking. They just apply them to social and economic warfare instead of military operations. So she's essentially a civilian officer using military tactics against me. That's one way to look at it. But remember, Sophia, military training has one advantage that civilian strategic education doesn't provide." "What's that?" Colonel Chun smiled grimly. "We're trained to win under pressure, to adapt when plans fail, and to never surrender when the mission is just. Civilian strategists are usually playing games with acceptable losses. Military strategists fight wars where failure isn't an option." That night, Sophia lay in bed planning her next moves. Madison had demonstrated superior intelligence capabilities and institutional influence, but she had also revealed something important about herself. She was treating this conflict like a sophisticated game with social and academic stakes. Sophia, however, had been trained to treat every conflict as if lives depended on the outcome. That fundamental difference in mindset might be the edge she needed. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Looking forward to seeing you at the spring formal. Make sure you wear something nice. It might be your last dance at Westfield Academy, a friend." Sophia stared at the message, realizing that Madison had just made a tactical error. She had revealed her timeline and her confidence level. The spring formal was 3 weeks away, which meant Madison planned to conclude her campaign by then. More importantly, the text showed that Madison was becoming overconfident, taking unnecessary risks to taunt her opponent. For the first time since this war began, Sophia smiled. Madison Hartwell might be a brilliant strategist, but she had just demonstrated that she was still a teenager playing high school games. Sophia Chun, on the other hand, was a soldier who had been trained to win real wars. The battle was about to shift dramatically, and Madison had no idea what she had awakened. The turning point came during what appeared to be an ordinary Tuesday morning, but would later be remembered as the day Sophia Chun stopped playing defense and launched her first counteroffensive. It began in advanced placement history, where Mrs. Blackwood had assigned a group project on military strategy during World War II. Students were randomly paired, and by what seemed like cruel fate, or perhaps Madison's behind-the-scenes maneuvering, Sophia found herself partnered with Brittany Walsh, one of Madison's corps lieutenants. Brittany approached the partnership with obvious reluctance, her designer notebook already filled with what appeared to be predetermined talking points. "Look," she said without preamble, "let's just get through this without any drama. I'll handle the research, you can do the presentation slides, and we'll both get our—" "Actually," Sophia replied calmly, "I think we should focus on the Pacific Theater. Specifically, the strategic deception operations that preceded major amphibious assaults." Brittany blinked in surprise. "Deception operations?" "Military misdirection," Sophia explained, her voice taking on the tone of someone who had grown up around such discussions. "Making the enemy think you're going to attack one place when you're actually planning to hit somewhere completely different. It's fascinating how effective simple misdirection can be against even sophisticated opponents." For the next hour, Sophia demonstrated a level of tactical knowledge that left Brittany struggling to keep up. She discussed Operation Fortitude, the elaborate deception that convinced the Germans that D-Day would happen at Pas-de-Calais instead of Normandy. She explained how General MacArthur used feints and false intelligence to island hop across the Pacific with minimal casualties. "How do you know all this?" Brittany asked, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "My father is Colonel James Chun," Sophia said simply. "Special Forces. He spent his career studying military strategy and unconventional warfare." "You pick things up." Brittany's eyes widened as the implication sank in. "Special Forces? Green Berets," Sophia confirmed. "He's trained Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Delta Force operators. Currently, he's working with Pentagon strategic planning. But more importantly for our project, he's an expert on psychological warfare and asymmetric conflict resolution." By the end of class, Brittany was visibly shaken. She had expected to be partnered with a quiet transfer student. Instead, she found herself working with someone who casually discussed military tactics with the authority of an insider. More disturbing was the growing realization that Sophia's knowledge wasn't academic, it was personal and deeply practical. During lunch, Brittany reported back to Madison with obvious unease. "We might have a problem," she said, sliding into her usual seat at the popular table. "The new girl isn't what we thought." Madison looked up from her salad with mild interest. "What do you mean?" "I mean her father is some kind of Special Forces colonel. She knows things, Madison. Military things, strategic things." She was talking about psychological warfare like it was a normal dinner conversation. Jessica laughed dismissively. "So what? Lots of parents have jobs. My mom's a socialite and I don't go around planning charity galas." "This is different," Brittany insisted. She looked at me like she was analyzing my weaknesses. And when she talked about military deception operations, it felt like she was sending me a message. Chloe frowned. "What kind of message?" "Like she was telling me that she knows we're not as smart as we think we are." Madison absorbed this information with the calculating expression of someone reassessing a strategic situation. "You're being Paranoid, Brittany. Military brat or not, she's still just a high school student in our territory playing by our rules. But privately, Madison felt the first stirrings of genuine concern. She had built her reputation on superior information and strategic thinking. The possibility that Sophia might have access to actual military-grade strategic knowledge was troubling. That afternoon, Madison's concerns intensified when she discovered that someone had been asking questions about her family's business dealings. Trevor Walsh mentioned in passing that his father had received an unusual call from a Pentagon contractor asking about the Hartwell Construction Company's federal contracts. Probably just routine due diligence, Trevor had said casually. But Dad thought it was weird because they seemed to know a lot about your family already. Madison's blood ran cold. Federal contractors didn't make routine calls about local construction companies unless someone with government connections had requested an investigation. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. She found Sophia that evening in the school library, apparently studying alone at a corner table surrounded by books on military history. Madison approached with her usual confident stride, but for the first time in years, she felt uncertain about how a conversation would unfold. Interesting reading material, Madison said, noting titles like The Art of War and Asymmetric Warfare in the Modern Era. Sophia looked up calmly. Research for my history project with Brittany. We're focusing on strategic deception operations. Fascinating subject, really. How small pieces of misdirection can completely change the outcome of major conflicts. I heard you've been having some interesting conversations with Pentagon contractors, Madison said, deciding to address the situation directly. Have I? Sophia replied with genuine seeming surprise. That's odd. Though I suppose when your father works in strategic planning, people sometimes reach out about various topics. Military families are pretty well connected in government circles. Madison felt a chill as she realized the implications. Sophia wasn't just offended by military training. She was potentially protected by an entire network of government and military connections. The kind of connections that could make serious problems for families whose businesses depended on federal contracts and political relationships. Look, Madison said, her voice losing some of its usual authority. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. This whole thing with Dillon, the misunderstanding with Principal Henderson, it doesn't have to continue. Misunderstanding? Sophia repeated, her tone remaining perfectly neutral. People sometimes misinterpret situations. What matters is moving forward positively. I'm sure we can find a way to coexist peacefully. Sophia closed her book and looked directly at Madison. You know what I learned from studying military history? The most successful commanders are the ones who know when to negotiate and when to press their advantage. They understand that some conflicts can be resolved through diplomacy, while others require more decisive action. And which kind of conflict do you think this is? That depends entirely on whether you're willing to call a genuine ceasefire, or if you're just repositioning for your next attack. Madison felt the conversation slipping away from her control. What would a genuine ceasefire look like? You leave Dillon and any other targets alone. You stop spreading stories about my background and behavior. You use your influence to correct the false narratives you've created about me. And you accept that some people at this school are off limits for your games. And if I don't agree to those terms? Sophia's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes reminded Madison uncomfortably of her father when he was discussing serious business matters. Then you'll discover that there are different kinds of warfare, Madison. Social warfare, institutional warfare, economic warfare, political warfare. You've been very good at the first two, but you might not enjoy discovering how the other types work. As Sophia gathered her books and left the library, Madison found herself alone with the realization that she had seriously miscalculated her opponent. This wasn't a typical high school student who could be intimidated or manipulated through conventional means. This was someone with access to resources and knowledge that Madison had never had to contend with. For the first time in her high school career, Madison Hartwell felt genuinely afraid. The next morning brought confirmation of her worst fears. Principal Henderson called an emergency meeting with Madison and her parents. When the Hartwells arrived at the school, they found themselves facing not just the principal, but also a representative from the Department of Defense Educational Activity and someone from the school board's legal department. There seems to be some confusion about recent events involving one of our transfer students. Principal Henderson began carefully. We've received inquiries from Federal Education Oversight about potential discrimination against a military family. Madison's father, Robert Hartwell, leaned forward aggressively. What kind of inquiries? The Dodd representative, a stern woman in her 50s, consulted her tablet. Questions about whether appropriate protocols were followed when investigating allegations against the daughter of an active-duty Special Forces officer. Whether witness statements were properly corroborated. Whether the school's response was proportionate to the actual evidence. We followed standard procedures, Principal Henderson said defensively. Based on the documentation we've reviewed, the school board lawyer interjected, it appears that disciplinary action was taken against Miss Chun based primarily on hearsay evidence from students who had obvious conflicts of interest. Madison felt the walls closing in as she realized that Sophia, or more likely, her father, had somehow triggered a formal review of the entire situation. Every lie, every manipulation, every false witness statement was now being examined by people with the authority to hold the school accountable. Furthermore, the DoD representative continued, we're concerned about reports that students have been engaging in what could be characterized as harassment against a military family. The department takes these matters very seriously, particularly when they involve dependents of personnel with security clearances. Robert Hartwell's face had gone pale. His construction company had several federal contracts that required security clearances. Any suggestion of harassment against military families could jeopardize not just those contracts, but his company's ability to bid on future government work. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding, he said quickly. If there have been any inappropriate interactions, I'm certain Madison and her friends would be happy to apologize and ensure nothing like this happens again. Madison stared at her father in shock. In the span of a single meeting, her entire campaign against Sophia had been not just defeated, but turned into a threat against her family's livelihood. Somehow, the quiet transfer student had managed to bring the full weight of the federal government down on Westfield Academy, forcing everyone, including Madison's own parents, to capitulate completely. As the meeting concluded with promises of full cooperation and immediate corrective action, Madison finally understood what Sophia had tried to tell her in the library. There were indeed different kinds of warfare, and Madison had just learned that she was completely outgunned in most of them. Walking through the hallways after the meeting, Madison felt the strange sensation of her world fundamentally shifting. For years, she had been the apex predator in Westfield Academy's social ecosystem. Now, suddenly, she was just another student who needed to be very careful about her behavior. Sophia was standing at her locker, organizing her books with the same calm efficiency she brought to everything else. When she noticed Madison approaching, she didn't look surprised or triumphant, just mildly interested. I heard you had an interesting morning, Sophia said conversationally. How did you do it? Madison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Do what? You know what? Sophia closed her locker and turned to face Madison directly. I told you there were different kinds of warfare. You chose to continue fighting after I offered you a chance to stop. This is what escalation looks like, when you're not the only one with connections. It's over, isn't it? Madison said, though it wasn't really a question. It's over, Sophia confirmed. But here's the thing, Madison, it doesn't have to be a complete loss for you. You're smart, you're organized, you have leadership abilities. You could use all of that to actually help people instead of hurting them. As Sophia walked away, Madison stood alone in the hallway, processing the complete reversal of her situation. She had thought she was playing a game where she controlled all the rules. Instead, she had started a war with someone who had been trained by professionals to win wars. The question now was whether Madison Hartwell was smart enough to learn from her defeat, or whether her pride would drive her to make one final, desperate mistake. 3 days after the federal intervention meeting, Westfield Academy felt like a different school entirely. The hallways buzzed with whispered conversations about what had really happened, wild theories about Sophia's connections, and nervous speculation about who else might face consequences. Madison's inner circle had scattered like leaves in a storm, each member desperately trying to distance themselves from the fallout. Jessica Price had suddenly developed an intense interest in community service, volunteering for every charity drive and cleanup project she could find. Chloe Davidson had transferred to her backup clique of theater kids, claiming she'd always preferred their authentic artistic energy. Only Brittany Walsh remained loyal to Madison, though even she seemed shell-shocked by the speed of their empire's collapse. The vacuum left by Madison's fallen regime created an unexpected opportunity that Sophia hadn't anticipated. Students who had been terrorized for years began approaching her with grateful smiles and tentative friendship offers. Teachers who had previously seemed indifferent started paying attention to her contributions in class. Even Principal Henderson nodded respectfully when they passed in the hallways, but it was the approach from an unexpected source that truly surprised Sophia. "Can we talk?" Madison asked, appearing at Sophia's locker Friday morning. Gone was the imperious confidence and designer armor. Instead, Madison wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that made her look younger and more vulnerable. "Of course," Sophia replied, closing her locker. "What's on your mind? Private?" Madison glanced around at the other students who were obviously eavesdropping on their conversation. They walked to an empty classroom, where Madison closed the door and leaned against it as if gathering courage for what she was about to say. "I need to understand something," Madison began. "That whole federal investigation thing, was it real or was it psychological warfare?" Sophia considered the question carefully. "What do you think?" "I think it was both. I think there really were inquiries made, but I also think you knew exactly how my father would react when his business was threatened. You understood that he'd throw me under the bus to protect his contracts. And how does that make you feel?" Madison laughed bitterly. "Like I've been living in a fantasy world where I thought family loyalty meant something. Turns out when the federal government comes knocking, Daddy's little princess becomes expendable pretty quickly." Sophia studied Madison's face, seeing genuine pain beneath the anger. "I'm sorry about that. I targeted the business connections because I knew it would be effective, not because I wanted to hurt your relationship with your parents." "Didn't you, though?" Madison asked sharply. "Wasn't showing me that my own father would sacrifice me part of the strategy?" The question hung in the air between them. Sophia realized that Madison was asking her to be honest about the ruthless precision of her counterattack. "Yes," Sophia said finally. "It was. In military strategy, you identify not just your opponent's resources, but also their emotional vulnerabilities. Your relationship with your father was both a source of power and a potential weakness. At least you're honest about it." Madison moved away from the door and sat heavily in one of the student desks. "Do you know what the worst part is? I actually respect what you did. The level of strategic thinking, the patience, the precision, it was brilliant. But it makes me realize how amateur I've been. All these years, I thought I was playing some sophisticated game, when really I was just a bully with better resources than most. You showed me what real strategy looks like." Sophia pulled up a chair to face Madison directly. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know," Madison admitted. For the first time in years, I have no plan, no strategy, no next move. Everyone expects me to either disappear in shame or try some desperate comeback attempt. But honestly, I'm tired of being the person I was. Who do you want to be instead? Madison was quiet for a long moment, staring out the classroom window at the students passing by in the hallway. Someone who uses her abilities to build things instead of tearing them down. Someone who earns respect instead of demanding it through fear. That's a good start. Is it though? Madison looked back at Sophia with genuine uncertainty. How do you even begin to change when everyone knows exactly who you used to be? How do you prove that you're different when your reputation is built on years of terrible behavior? Sophia recognized the question as more than academic. Madison was genuinely asking for guidance. My father always says that reputation is what people think you are, but character is what you actually do when no one is watching. If you change your character, your reputation will eventually follow. And in the meantime, you accept that earning back trust takes time. You accept that some people may never forgive you. And you do the right thing anyway, not because it benefits you, but because it's who you want to be. Madison nodded slowly. Your father sounds like a wise man. He is. He also says that the best soldiers are often people who learned hard lessons about leadership the difficult way. People who made mistakes and chose to grow from them instead of repeating them. Are you suggesting I could be a good soldier? Madison asked with a slight smile, the first genuine smile Sophia had seen from her. I'm suggesting you already have the strategic mind and leadership abilities. The question is whether you'll use them for good or continue using them for harm. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Through the classroom window, they could see a crowd gathering near the main entrance. Sophia and Madison exchanged glances before heading out to investigate. At the center of the crowd stood Kyle Morrison, a senior football player who had apparently missed the memo about the new social order at Westfield Academy. He was holding court with a group of underclassmen, regaling them with stories about how things used to be before outside interference ruined everything. Madison knew how to keep people in line. Kyle was saying loudly enough for everyone to hear. She understood that some people need to be put in their place. This whole thing with the military girl is just political correctness gone crazy. Sophia felt the familiar tension in her shoulders that preceded potential conflict. Kyle was clearly testing whether Madison's fall from power meant that her former victims were now fair game for anyone who wanted to fill the leadership vacuum. Before all this federal investigation nonsense, Kyle continued, we could handle problems internally. Now everyone's afraid to breathe wrong because some transfer student's daddy has connections. Several students in the crowd looked uncomfortable, glancing between Kyle and Sophia. Riley, Marcus, and Aisha had pushed through to stand near Sophia, clearly ready to back her up if needed. But it was Madison's response that surprised everyone. Kyle, Madison said, stepping forward with her old authoritative voice, you're embarrassing yourself. The crowd fell silent. Kyle turned to Madison with obvious relief. Finally, someone with some sense. Madison, tell these people that I'm telling you to shut up and think about what you're saying. Madison interrupted, her voice carrying the commanding tone that had once ruled the school. You're talking about harassing a student whose father serves our country. You're complaining about federal interference, when what actually happened was that the school was forced to follow proper procedures instead of acting on gossip and prejudice. Kyle's face flushed red. Madison, what the hell? This girl destroyed everything you built. What I built was wrong, Madison replied firmly. I spent years terrorizing people who didn't deserve it. I used my family's money and connections to hurt kids who were just trying to get through high school. Sophia didn't destroy anything worth keeping. The crowd was stunned into complete silence. Several students pulled out their phones, clearly recording what would become the most talked about moment in Westfield Academy history. You're seriously defending her?" Kyle asked in disbelief. "I'm seriously acknowledging that she was right and I was wrong. And if you try to continue the kind of behavior that I used to engage in, you'll discover that she's not the only person at this school with connections and resources." Kyle looked around the crowd, clearly expecting support that wasn't materializing. The underclassmen who had been listening to his rant were now backing away, unwilling to associate themselves with someone who was picking a fight with both Sophia and Madison. "This is insane," Kyle muttered, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. As the gathering dispersed, students approached Madison with expressions ranging from confusion to admiration. For the first time in months, people were looking at her with genuine respect rather than fear or resentment. "Why did you do that?" Sophia asked quietly. "Because it was the right thing to do," Madison replied. "And because I meant what I said earlier about wanting to be someone different. It's going to complicate your social rehabilitation. Defending me isn't going to make you popular with everyone." Madison shrugged. "My father always told me that leadership means making hard choices. I just never understood what that actually meant until now." That afternoon, something unprecedented happened at Westfield Academy. Madison and Sophia were seen eating lunch together, engaged in what appeared to be serious conversation. The sight of the former queen and the military brat sitting across from each other, not as enemies but as something approaching allies, sent shockwaves through the school's social ecosystem. "Is this real?" Riley asked, sliding into the seat next to Sophia. "Are you actually having a friendly conversation with Madison Hartwell?" "People can change," Sophia replied diplomatically. "Some people can change," Madison corrected. "But only if they're willing to accept that everything they thought they knew about themselves might be wrong." Marcus and Aisha joined the table, creating the most unlikely lunch group in Westfield Academy history. As they talked, other students began to approach some cautiously, some curiously, but all drawn by the unprecedented sight of former enemies finding common ground. For the first time since arriving at Westfield Academy, Sophia felt like she might actually be building something positive rather than just defending herself from attack. And for the first time in years, Madison felt like she might be discovering who she actually was beneath the armor of wealth and manufactured superiority. Neither of them knew that their tentative alliance was about to face its greatest test, or that Madison's most dangerous enemies weren't the students she had terrorized, but the ones who had enabled and benefited from her reign of terror. The first sign of serious trouble came during what should have been a routine Monday morning. Sophia arrived at school to find her car's tires slashed, the word "snitch" spray-painted across her windshield in bright red letters. But it wasn't random vandalism. The precision of the cuts and the strategic location in the faculty parking area suggested someone with access and specific knowledge of security camera blind spots. "This is escalation," Riley observed as she, Marcus, and Asisha surveyed the damage. Whoever did this wanted to send a message without getting caught. Madison appeared at Sophia's shoulder, her face pale with concern. "This wasn't any of my former friends," she said immediately. "They're all too scared of the federal investigation fallout to try something this bold." "Then who?" Marcus asked before anyone could answer. Principal Henderson's voice crackled over the intercom. "Sophia Chun and Madison Hartwell. Please report to the main office immediately." They found the office buzzing with tense energy. Principal Henderson stood behind his desk, flanked by the school security officer and a woman in a business suit whom Sophia didn't recognize. More ominously, Robert Hartwell sat in the corner chair, his face set in hard lines that suggested this wasn't a friendly meeting. "Miss Chun," the woman in the suit began, "I'm Detective Sarah Kim with the Fairfax County Police. We need to discuss the vandalism to your vehicle and some related incidents that have come to our attention." "Related incidents?" Sophia asked. Detective Kim consulted her tablet. "Over the weekend, 3 families associated with Westfield Academy received anonymous packages containing printed materials about your father's military assignments, your family's frequent relocations, and speculation about why as special forces family would suddenly settle in this particular community. Sophia felt ice form in her stomach. Someone had been conducting counterintelligence operations against her family, gathering and distributing information that could potentially compromise her father's security clearance or ongoing missions. The materials, Detective Kim continued, contain details that suggest access to restricted databases and possibly classified information. We're treating this as a potential national security issue. Robert Hartwell leaned forward aggressively. Detective, I want to make it clear that my daughter has had nothing to do with any of this. Since the federal investigation last week, Madison has been completely cooperative, and Mr. Hartwell, Detective Kim interrupted. We're not here about Madison. We're here because someone is targeting a military family with sophisticated intelligence gathering operations. The question is whether these attacks are connected to recent conflicts at this school. Madison spoke up for the first time. Detective, may I ask which families received these packages? The Morrisons, the Blackwoods, and the Andersons. Sophia's mind raced through the connections. Kyle Morrison was the senior who had confronted them last week. Mrs. Blackwood was her AP history teacher. The Andersons, she couldn't immediately place them. Dr. Patricia Anderson, Madison said quietly, clearly following the same logical path. She's on the school board. She was in the meeting when they discussed the federal investigation. So someone targeted families connected to either the recent confrontation or the administrative response, Detective Kim noted. Miss Chun, can you think of anyone who might have both the motivation and the capability to conduct this level of intelligence gathering? Before Sophia could answer, her phone buzzed with an urgent text from her father. Come home immediately. Do not discuss this situation with anyone else until we talk. Detective, Sophia said carefully, I think I need to speak with my father before proceeding further. Of course. But Miss Chun, until we determine who's behind this, you should consider yourself and your family potential targets of a very sophisticated adversary. The drive home was tense and silent. Madison had asked to come along, claiming that as a potential witness to recent events, she might have information that could help. But Sophia suspected Madison's real motivation was concern for her newfound friend's safety. Colonel Chun was waiting in the living room, still in his army uniform, his laptop open to what appeared to be an official briefing document. His expression was grimmer than Sophia had seen since they'd arrived in Virginia. Dad, Sophia said as she and Madison entered. Sit down, both of you. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders in crisis situations. Sophia, someone has been conducting surveillance on our family using methods and resources that suggest professional training. He turned the laptop screen toward them, revealing what appeared to be a detailed dossier on the Chun family. Photos of their house, Sophia's daily routes to school, even images of Colonel Chun entering and leaving the Pentagon. This isn't a high school drama, he continued. This is intelligence-grade surveillance. Whoever's behind this has access to databases, sophisticated equipment, and the operational security to avoid detection by both local law enforcement and military security. Madison stared at the screen in shock. Who could possibly have those kinds of resources? That's what we're trying to determine, Colonel Chun replied. But I can tell you that the targeting package sent to the Anderson family contained information about classified projects that only someone with high-level clearance would know. Could it be foreign intelligence? Sophia asked, though the question seemed surreal in the context of high school conflicts. Possibly. Or it could be domestic actors with government connections who see our family as a threat to their interests. He closed the laptop and looked directly at both girls. Either way, this has moved beyond anything the local police can handle. Military intelligence is now involved. The implications crashed over Sophia like a cold wave. What had started as A simple conflict with high school bullies had somehow escalated into a potential national security investigation. Either their actions had attracted the attention of genuinely dangerous people, or someone with serious resources had decided to use the school conflicts as cover for a broader operation against her family. "Sir," Madison said hesitantly, "could this be connected to my family's business? My father has federal contracts, and if someone wanted to leverage those relationships..." Colonel Chun studied Madison with the analytical gaze of a career intelligence officer. "It's possible. Tell me about your family's federal connections." For the next hour, Madison detailed her father's construction contracts, the political relationships that sustained them, and the competitors who had lost bids to Hartwell Construction over the years. As she spoke, Colonel Chun took notes with the methodical thoroughness of someone building an operational assessment. "There are 3 companies that have repeatedly lost major contracts to us," Madison concluded. "Blackstone Development, Sterling and Associates, and Meridian Construction. All of them have the resources to conduct sophisticated intelligence operations, and all of them have connections to government contractors. And all of them," Colonel Chun noted, "would benefit if Hartwell Construction lost its security clearances due to association with harassment of military families." The pieces of a much larger puzzle began falling into place. Someone had likely orchestrated or at least exploited the conflicts at Westfield Academy as part of a broader economic warfare campaign. Madison's former behavior had provided the perfect cover for more serious actors to target both families. "So what do we do?" Sophia asked. "We treat this as what it is, a military operation," her father replied. "From now on, both of you operate under enhanced security protocols. No traveling alone, no deviating from established patterns without clearance, and absolutely no discussing this situation with anyone else." "What about school?" Madison asked. "School continues, but with military protection." Colonel Chun checked his watch. "A security team will be established around Westfield Academy starting tomorrow. They'll be discreet, but they'll be there." That evening, as Sophia and Madison worked on homework in the Chen family's secure home office, they tried to process the surreal turn their lives had taken. "6 months ago, I was worried about what designer dress to wear to charity galas," Madison said, looking up from her calculus textbook. "Now I'm apparently part of a federal investigation involving military intelligence and corporate espionage. 6 months ago, I was just trying to survive another school transfer," Sophia replied. "Now I'm wondering if professional intelligence operatives are trying to destroy my family because I stood up to high school bullies. Do you think we're overreacting? Could this just be some crazy coincidence?" Sophia considered the question seriously. "My father doesn't overreact to security threats. If he says this is military-grade surveillance, then it is. The question is whether we stumbled into something bigger, or whether something bigger was using us from the beginning." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Colonel Chun's phone ringing in the next room. Through the thin walls, they could hear his end of what was clearly an official briefing call. Double quotes ... confirmed involvement by at least 3 federal contractors ... Yes, sir, the targeting appears coordinated ... No, sir. We don't believe the miners were aware they were being manipulated ... Requesting full counterintelligence support." Madison and Sophia exchanged worried glances. The scope of whatever they had become involved in was clearly beyond anything they had imagined. The next morning brought confirmation that their lives had changed permanently. As they arrived at Westfield Academy, they noticed several new faces among the usual crowd of students and faculty. The new students were too old, too alert, and too obviously observant to be genuine teenagers. "Discreet security," Madison murmured as they walked past a substitute teacher who moved with the controlled precision of military training. But the real shock came during the first period, when Detective Kim arrived with a team of federal agents to conduct interviews with selected students and faculty. The investigation had moved from local law enforcement to federal jurisdiction overnight. Miss Hartwell, one of the agents, said as Madison was called from her English class, "We need to discuss your family's business relationships and any communications you may have received about industrial competitors." Meanwhile, Sophia found herself in a conference room with 2 FBI agents and a representative from the Department of Defense, all asking detailed questions about the timeline of conflicts at school and whether she had noticed any unusual interest in her family's background. "Miss Chun," the Dodd representative said, "we have reason to believe that certain events at this school were engineered or exploited by actors seeking to compromise your father's security clearance and ongoing projects." "You mean someone orchestrated Madison's campaign against me?" "Not necessarily orchestrated, but possibly amplified and guided. We're finding evidence that suggests certain individuals provided Madison's group with information and resources beyond what typical high school students would have access to." The revelation hit Sophia like a physical blow. Madison's sophisticated tactics, her access to information about Sophia's background, her family's strategic responses, all of it might have been guided by professional operatives using high school conflicts as cover for a much more serious operation. "Are you saying Madison was working with foreign agents?" Sophia asked. "We're saying that Madison and her friends may have been unknowingly manipulated by people with their own agendas. The question now is identifying those people and determining the extent of any ongoing operations." As the interviews concluded and the federal agents departed, Sophia and Madison found themselves in the strange position of being both potential victims and unwitting participants in what appeared to be a case of industrial espionage or foreign intelligence operations. "This is insane," Madison said as they sat together in the empty cafeteria after school. "Are they saying that my entire campaign against you was actually part of some kind of spy operation?" "It's possible," Sophia replied. "Think about it. You had access to information about my family that you shouldn't have been able to get. Your tactics were sophisticated beyond typical high school level. Even your friends' responses seemed unusually coordinated." Madison was quiet for a long moment, clearly reviewing the events of the past months through this new lens. "Jessica's mom," she said finally. "She's the one who made the calls about your family background. She's the one who suggested certain approaches to the administration. She always seemed to know exactly what buttons to push. And Jessica's mom has connections throughout the DC political and business community." "Oh my God," Madison breathed, the full implications dawning on her. "We were pawns. All of us. Someone was using our conflicts to gather intelligence on your family and potentially damage both our family's government relationships." The weight of this realization settled over them both. What they had experienced as personal conflicts and strategic victories had actually been part of a much larger game, played by adults with resources and agendas they were only beginning to understand. "So what happens now?" Madison asked. "Now we wait for the professionals to sort out who was really pulling the strings," Sophia replied. "And we try to figure out how to go back to being normal high school students when nothing about our situation is normal anymore." As they gathered their belongings to leave, both girls understood that their alliance had been forged not just through their personal conflicts, but through shared recognition that they had both been manipulated by forces beyond their control. Whatever came next, they would face it together as two teenagers who had learned far too much about the adult world of intelligence operations and corporate warfare. The spring formal was still 2 weeks away, but it no longer seemed like the climactic confrontation Madison had originally planned. Instead, it had become a potential security risk that would require federal oversight and military protection. Their war of high school social dynamics had evolved into something far more serious and dangerous than either of them had ever imagined possible. The climax came not with the elaborate confrontation Madison had originally envisioned, but in the most mundane setting imaginable, the second-floor girls' bathroom during lunch. Period. On a seemingly ordinary Thursday afternoon, Sophia had excused herself from the cafeteria, where she and Madison were working with Riley, Marcus, and Aisha on a group project for their newly formed peer mediation committee. The federal investigation had been ongoing for a week, with agents conducting discreet interviews and examining digital communications. But life at Westfield Academy had begun to settle into a new normal under the watchful eyes of the security detail. She pushed open the bathroom door and immediately sensed something wrong. The lighting seemed dimmer than usual, and there was an unusual smell in the air, something chemical and sharp that made her military-trained instincts trigger an immediate alert status. "Hello, Sophia," came a voice from the last stall. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Patricia Anderson, the school board member whose family had received one of the anonymous intelligence packages. But something was fundamentally different about her appearance and demeanor. Gone was the frumpy, bureaucratic exterior. Instead, she moved with the controlled precision of someone with professional training. "Mrs. Anderson," Sophia replied carefully, noting the woman's positioning between her and the exit. "I didn't realize you were visiting the school today." "Oh, I'm not visiting," Mrs. Anderson said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm here on business. Very specific business that involves you and your troublesome family." Sophia's hand moved instinctively toward her phone, but Mrs. Anderson held up a small device that she recognized as a signal jammer. "I'm afraid that won't work here, dear. We need to have a private conversation without any interruptions from your father's security friends." "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where you and I discuss how you're going to help me complete a project I've been working on for several months. You see, your arrival at Westfield Academy was incredibly fortuitous for my purposes. I needed a way to gather intelligence on your father's projects, and Madison's little social war provided the perfect cover." Sophia felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. "You're the one who guided Madison's campaign against me. You fed her information about my family. Not directly, of course. That would have been too obvious. But Jessica Price's mother and I serve on several committees together. It was simple enough to ensure that the right information found its way to Madison through appropriate channels." Mrs. Anderson reached into her purse and withdrew what looked like professional-grade electric hair clippers, the kind used by military barbers on base. The original plan was much more elegant. "Madison was supposed to systematically destroy your reputation and force your family to transfer again, disrupting your father's current assignment. But then you had to go and win that little war of yours. So you're going to finish what Madison started. I'm going to create a situation that forces your father to choose between protecting his daughter's dignity and protecting national security. Information." Mrs. Anderson plugged the clippers into the wall outlet, and their ominous buzzing filled the small bathroom. "You're going to sit still while I shave your head completely bald. Then you're going to walk out of this bathroom and continue your day as if nothing happened. And if I don't?" Mrs. Anderson's pleasant mask slipped entirely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "Then the classified information about your father's upcoming deployment to Southeast Asia gets released to certain foreign intelligence services. Information that would put not just him, but his entire unit at risk." Sophia's blood ran cold. Her father's deployment orders were classified at the highest levels. The fact that Mrs. Anderson knew about them confirmed that she was working with serious intelligence resources. "You're a spy," Sophia said, not really a question. "I'm a patriot who understands that sometimes national interests require unpleasant sacrifices. Your father's current project threatens certain strategic partnerships that have taken years to develop. His deployment would disrupt operations that are vital to American security interests." "You mean operations that are vital to your handler's interests?" Mrs. Anderson smiled coldly. "The distinction is less important than you might think." "What?" Matters is that you're going to help me send a very clear message to Colonel Chun about the consequences of refusing to cooperate with reasonable requests." She moved closer with the clippers, clearly expecting Sophia to submit out of fear for her father's safety. It was a sophisticated psychological operation using Sophia's love for her father and her understanding of military honor to force compliance with something that would humiliate and traumatize her. What Mrs. Anderson hadn't counted on was that Sophia Chun had been raised by one of the best tactical minds in the U.S. military, and that she had inherited not just his strategic thinking, but also his absolute refusal to surrender to threats. "You made one critical error in your assessment," Sophia said calmly, shifting her weight into a balanced fighting stance. "And what's that?" "You assumed I was just a frightened teenager who could be intimidated by threats against my family." Sophia's voice took on the same cold authority she had heard in her father's voice when he briefed soldiers heading into combat zones. "But I'm a soldier's daughter who has been trained since childhood to recognize and neutralize threats to national security." Mrs. Anderson laughed dismissively. "You're 16 years old and trapped in a bathroom with no way to call for help. What exactly do you think you're going to do?" "I'm going to disable an enemy operative who just confessed to espionage against the United States military." Before Mrs. Anderson could react, Sophia moved with the lightning precision of her father's training. She ducked under the clippers, caught Mrs. Anderson's wrist in an iron grip, and executed a perfect armbar that sent the weapon clattering across the tile floor. Mrs. Anderson recovered quickly, more quickly than a civilian bureaucrat should have been able to, confirming that she had professional combat training. She spun out of Sophia's grip and launched a counterattack that would have overwhelmed most opponents. But Sophia had spent 8 years sparring with her father and the soldiers he trained. She slipped Mrs. Anderson's punch, trapped her extended arm, and used the woman's own momentum to drive her face first into the bathroom wall. The impact was controlled, but decisive enough to stun her opponent without causing permanent damage. "Stay down," Sophia advised as Mrs. Anderson slumped against the wall, dazed from the impact. "You're under citizen's arrest for espionage. And I guarantee that my father's security team is already tracking your signal jammer." As if summoned by her words, the bathroom door burst open to reveal 2 members of the federal security detail, followed immediately by Detective Kim and a man in military uniform whom Sophia didn't recognize. "Miss Chun, are you injured?" the military officer asked, while the security team secured Mrs. Anderson with professional efficiency. "No, sir. But she's been conducting intelligence operations against my father's projects. She has classified information about his deployment orders." Detective Kim was already photographing the clippers and signal jammer as evidence. "Patricia Anderson, you're under arrest for espionage, conspiracy, and attempted assault. You have the right to remain silent." As Mrs. Anderson was led away in handcuffs, still groggy from her encounter with the bathroom wall, the military officer turned to Sophia with something approaching admiration. "Colonel Mills, Army Intelligence," he introduced himself. "Your father trained you well, Miss Chun. Mrs. Anderson has been under surveillance for months, but we needed her to reveal her operational capabilities and intelligence sources. Your situation provided the perfect opportunity to draw her into the open." "You mean I was bait?" "You were a protected asset in a carefully managed operation. But your ability to handle the situation when it went kinetic exceeded all expectations." 20 minutes later, Sophia found herself in Principal Henderson's office for what felt like the 100th time that semester, but under very different circumstances. This time, she was surrounded by federal agents, military officers, and her father, who had arrived from the Pentagon in record time. "The operation is complete," Colonel Chun announced to the assembled group. Mrs. Anderson was the primary asset for a sophisticated intelligence ring that has been targeting military families throughout the D.C. area. Her arrest will allow us to roll up the entire network. "What about the other families?" Madison asked. She had been called to the office as a key witness in what was now being treated as a major counterintelligence success. "All safe," Detective Kim replied. "Mrs. Anderson's arrest has already led to the identification of her handlers and co-conspirators. The threat to military families in this area has been eliminated." Principal Henderson, who still looked shell-shocked by the revelation that a school board member had been a foreign intelligence operative, cleared his throat nervously. "What does this mean for the school? For the students who were involved?" "It means," Colonel Mills said, "that several students at the school demonstrated exceptional courage and patriotism in the face of a serious national security threat. Both Miss Chun and Miss Hartwell should be commended for their roles in exposing this operation." Madison looked surprised. "I didn't know I was helping expose anything. I thought I was just being a terrible person." "Your conflicts with Miss Chun and your eventual cooperation with authorities provided crucial intelligence about how foreign operatives were manipulating civilian institutions. Your willingness to change course when you learned the truth was instrumental in protecting national security." As the official debriefings concluded and the federal agents departed, Sophia and Madison found themselves alone in the hallway, processing the surreal conclusion to their semester-long conflict. "So," Madison said finally, "we went from high school enemies to accidentally foiling an international espionage ring. That's not how I expected this year to go." "My father always says that military life is 90% boredom and 10% sheer terror," Sophia replied. "I guess civilian life can be the same way. What happens now? Do we go back to being normal high school students?" Sophia considered the question. "I don't think either of us was ever really normal, but maybe we can be better than normal." The spring formal was held on schedule 2 weeks later, though with significantly enhanced security and a guest list that had been thoroughly vetted by federal authorities. Madison attended with Trevor Walsh, her relationship with him having survived her transformation from Queen Bee to reformed leader. Sophia went with Riley, Marcus, and Aisheu as a group, having decided that traditional dating could wait until her life was less likely to involve international espionage. The theme had been changed from new beginnings to strength through unity, a choice that reflected the school's collective experience of discovering that they had all been caught up in something much larger and more dangerous than typical teenage drama. As they stood together on the decorated dance floor, surrounded by classmates who would probably never fully understand what had really happened that semester, Sophia and Madison reflected on how much their lives had changed. "Do you ever regret it?" Madison asked. "Standing up to me that first day with Dylan?" "Never," Sophia replied without hesitation. "Do you regret being the person you were before all this happened?" "Every day. But I'm grateful for the chance to become someone better." Principal Henderson took the microphone to address the assembled students. "This year has taught us all important lessons about courage, redemption, and the power of standing up for what's right. We've learned that sometimes the greatest threats come from unexpected sources, and that sometimes the greatest strength comes from unexpected alliances." He paused to look directly at Sophia and Madison. "We've also learned that heroes don't always look like what we expect. Sometimes they're quiet transfer students who refuse to let others be hurt. Sometimes they're former bullies who find the courage to change. And sometimes they're all of us, working together to protect what matters most." As the evening continued, Sophia found herself thinking about her father's words about the fight. You don't have to fight being the greatest victory. In the end, the real victory hadn't been defeating Madison or even surviving Mrs. Anderson's attack. The real victory had been building something positive from conflict, turning enemies into allies, and protecting not just herself but her entire community from threats they never saw coming. 6 months later, Madison and Sophia would room together at West Point Military Academy, having both decided that their experiences at Westfield Academy had given them a calling to serve their country. Their unlikely friendship, forged in the crucible of high school warfare and international espionage, would become the foundation for distinguished military careers that would take them around the world. But that's a story for another day. 4. Now, it was enough that two teenage girls who had started as enemies had learned to stand together against threats much more serious than anything high school could throw at them. They had discovered that real strength wasn't about dominating others, but about protecting them. And they had learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones that teach you who you really want to be. As the final song played and the spring formal drew to a close, Sophia Chun and Madison Hartwell stood side by side, no longer the quiet military brat and the queen bee, but simply two friends who had learned that courage, honor, and loyalty were more powerful than any weapon in any arsenal. The bullies who had tried to break them had only made them stronger. The enemies who had tried to use them had only brought them together. And the challenges that had seemed insurmountable had only revealed the depth of their character and the strength of their bond. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.